absolutely my honor to welcome the next panel of phenomenal speakers. We have such a great lineup today that it's hard to say which panel has been my favorite, but I've certainly been looking forward to the voices in this conversation. I am going to give you a brief introduction and ask each one of our speakers to lead us in a bit of conversation about what they do and how they've used social media as a form of advocacy, talking about civil disobedience, dismantling racism within our own profession and our own systems of education as well. Lots of great information and great speakers. And then again, at the end, we'll open it up for Q&A. You can raise your virtual hand, you can chat it in the chat box, you can private message it to me as well. Now, most of our panel here today does not need any introduction because their work certainly speaks for itself. But I am absolutely honored to be joined by Kim Young, AKA Dope Black social worker, instrumental leader and voice in our profession. Certainly on social media, many of you follow her. We have Terry Lyons, sorry about that, Terry. Terry is a social worker and a JD. She owns Lyons and Associates practice here in New Jersey and also sits on our PACE committee and leads all of our amicus work, which is an essential form of advocacy. We have Mora, who's a clinician from AIDS Delaware, clinical director, and also very involved in advocacy work, and has some stories about Dr. Fauci from younger years, I believe. Elle is also the president of NASW Delaware, and just grateful to have you with us as well, Elle. And we have Natalie Bimbray, and Natalie is a professor from Rutgers, also activist in the Black Lives Matter movement with the education component. Sorry, I'm going to butcher that a little bit today. I'm a little tired, folks. But welcome to everyone. Thank you so much for joining us in this conversation and sharing your expertise with the next generation of social workers. I know they're going to learn a lot from your wisdom and your experience. First, I will bring up Kim, if you would you're welcome to turn your camera on. Thank you so much for joining us, and I will turn the floor over virtually to you.
Well, thank you so much for the introduction. And Jennifer, we are offering you, I'm going to extend all the grace in the world to you, because I can only imagine all the hard work and effort that went into making this happen. So y'all, I'm so grateful to be able to be in this space with each and every one of you. I'm imagining for those who are familiar with me getting in trouble on the internet, you were probably shocked that I'm at an event hosted by the NASW, but y'all, I'm here because I believe in what our field is. I believe in where it's going. I have faith that young folks, in particular Black and brown social workers, are going to drive this profession in the direction it's meant to be going in. And so I am excited to be able to share whatever I can share and learn and grow with each of you. For those who aren't too familiar with me, I practice as a licensed clinical social worker out in Richmond, Virginia. I have primarily worked with youth and young adults, in particular multi-systems court-impacted youth, for the last 13 years. I stepped away from direct service in September of 2019, so I have not written a treatment plan, a note, a quarterly, nothing in almost 2 years, and I have to say I am grateful for that. So I moved upstream almost 2 Novembers ago, and have been focused primarily on programmatic, organizational, and system change, and what that work looks like for Black folks and Black and brown folks in the communities that I also live in, the community that I serve. So that is something I don't take for granted. I do believe that advocacy has multiple lanes. And I don't move in a space of judging of how people show up and do advocacy. I think we have to really understand where skill sets and strengths lie, but then also not shame how people do their work, because everybody has different skills, everybody has different strengths, and they all are going to just, as long as we're kind of forging in the same direction, we're going to get something done. So folks kind of grew to be exposed to me, I would say in July of last year, when I had the whole little situation with the NASW on social media. But truthfully, that person that some of y'all are just kind of getting to know and hopefully love for who I am, like, y'all, I've been this person. I've been loud, I've been getting in trouble, I've been organizing, I've been mobilizing since I was in middle school. Like, my nickname in my family has always been the rebel. Like, I was always that kid. Like, if you could see behind me, I'm gonna move a little bit. I got Chairman Fred Hampton behind me. And it's not just because the movie recently came out. This is literally one of my favorite humans to ever walk this planet. Because one thing that I value and love about Chairman Fred's work and what he has taught us and what the legacy left behind is that we can organize with everybody on behalf of liberation for Black and brown people, but you must organize with everybody. There is room for everyone in advocacy. There is room and everyone in the fight for liberation. And so I believe as social workers, it is important that we get back to our roots and doing such. Like, I think we've been kind of dazed and confused and hypnotized by the DSM and clinical treatment and all these things. But I believe at our core, that's not who we are. Like, yeah, we could do therapy. It's cute, right? Like, we could write treatment plans. We could do all of that stuff, but we're fighters. We fight. And so I'm excited to be able to stand in a place of having clinical licensure, but, you know, champion the message that we fight first. Like, that's who we are as a profession. We advocate, we fight, we strategize, we mobilize, we organize, we get in good trouble, right? We disrupt systems, even our own. And so the social work profession is, you know, situated inside of a system. And I believe that we got some work to do to dismantle what we have as a profession. Because in many ways, y'all, we should not be this proximate to pain and human suffering without trying to fight to change the conditions, even if that means how we do social work as we know it no longer exists. And so that's the fight that I'm in. And I'm excited to share and offer, like I said earlier, anything that I can during our time together today.
Thank you so much, Kim. I know that we are in the fight together, and I so appreciate your willingness to show up to an NASW space, and that we can not always have the same approach, we can not always have the same lens, but at the end of the day, we're in the work together. And you're so right. We need to be working together to fight to change our profession and to fix even our institutions and our associations. And I value your voice, and I'm really grateful of your spirit of collaboration as well. We follow you, but we also really appreciate that you show up for the important work here with us, and grateful for you. I'm going to turn it over next to Teresa Lyons. Terry, welcome.
Hey guys, Terry Lyons. I'm a lawyer and a social worker. I wanted to start today with a story, and I think this story has power. It'll feed into everything else. So besides being a lawyer and a social worker, I also am a foster parent, foster and adoptive parent. We've had 5 kids in my home. 3 have stayed, 2 have been reunified with their biological parents, and all of my children happen to be African-American. And they make fun of me for being white. And I'm going to tell you about a particular story that I think is very important and leads into how, first and foremost, I don't believe that anyone can be engaged in acts of civil disobedience or any part of the discussion unless you're willing to put yourself in a position that is painful, uncomfortable, and humiliating. So I'm going to tell you this story. So I have a dog. I have a little dog. He's this old white Shih Tzu. He's like 8 pounds. His name is Teddy. He's really old. And about 3 years ago, my kids told me, Mom, we want another dog. So I'm like, all right, look, I don't care as long as it's a rescue. You got to have a rescue, right? You can't be a big wacky leftist liberal unless you have at least one rescue dog in your house. So my children find this organization that rescues chocolate labs, and in particular, this chocolate lab. He was born in a puppy mill down south, and because he had a little bit of too much, his coloring was a little bit off. He was put in a kill shelter at 8 weeks. And so my children found this animal, and the way that it works is that from this rescue organization, whenever you go, you have to bring whatever other animals you have with you. So we're going, and it is me and my wife, who also is whiter than I am, our brown children, and our little white Teddy dog. And we go there to meet this chocolate lab, and this chocolate lab is gorgeous. I mean, his coat is just dark and shiny, and he's 30 pounds, and he's lumbering all around. He's full of life, and he's jumping all over our little dog. And the agency says, listen, I think you can bring the dog home with you. Just please, please, please give your little dog Teddy some space. Okay. We go to leave. We hop in the car. My wife says to the kids, you guys hopping back with the puppy, this big giant chocolate lab, and we'll hop up front with Teddy, the little white dog. Great. I'm driving. All of a sudden, my daughter starts yelling from the back seat, "Put all the brown people in the back of the car." They start talking to the dog. "You see that white dog up front? That dog's up front because he's a white dog. You're back here because you're a brown dog." My son starts singing "Swing Low, Sweet Chat," right? My kids are harassing me. And my first reaction was, this is why I hate my own children, right? Because I buy them something they want and they're still harassing me. But it also led as an opportunity for conversation. And what does it mean for them? And what does it mean for our family? And what's it like to be a brown child being raised by, white people and all of those things? So I tell you that story because I've got lots of stories in my house. And I'm happy to share more of them. I think it's also poignant that I'm speaking today. For those of you that are not aware, today the jury is being impaneled on the George Floyd trial. If that was not mentioned today, that is happening today in Minnesota. That the George Floyd panel is jury panels being assembled. What you may or may not know is actually part of the jury questions, part of the ways that they are vetting the jury, is they are actually asking, "What do you think about Black Lives Matter? Have you participated in any rallies? If you've participated in any rallies, what kind of sign did you carry? Did you have any property destroyed in the riots?" And so even though there is this massive jury trial going on, the lawyers, the judges, and the system at play is still asking, even of those that are going to be impaneled, what their position is, what their relationship is to the civil resistance manner. Okay, real quick, what I want to define as a lawyer, I feel like I have to give a definition. What is civil disobedience? You need 4 components. You need 4 components for there to be civil disobedience. 1, there must be a law, an order, or a command that's in place, right? Number 2, it must be by a government or someone else in authority that's imposing that. There has to be a difference in power. 3, there must be a refusal to comply with that order, that governance, that command. And 4, most importantly, you have to be willing to suffer the consequences of that disobedience, right? Civil disobedience is not for the weak of heart. Lots of people spend lots of time in jail. If you think that civil disobedience is just holding a sign, yeah, that's great. But the real work is done by those people that are dragged out by cops and have to spend some time in jail. I also want to speak a little bit to what Kim said. I think that social workers have a duty to engage in civil disobedience, because it actually it helps improve the law and it helps improve society. Most people wrongly believe, right? I wrote a book, it's a best-selling book, and it talks about some of the irony in the law. Most people believe that the purpose of the law is justice. I'm here to tell you, hell no. Hell no, the purpose of law is not justice. The purpose of law is order and predictability. Because when there's order and predictability, then systems and processes and businesses and people can function. Now, most of the time, the law tries to be just and tries to achieve justice. Why? Not because it's right, but because they realize that the more just the laws are, the more likely people will follow them and the more likely there will be order. And so when you engage in civil disobedience, you're not really seeking to necessarily break the law just for breaking the law's sake. You're trying to break the law for improvement. So if you're going to a protest, if you're going to be engaged in civil disobedience, you better have a purpose as to what your outcome is rather than just get arrested. It was Martin Luther King who said, "A man who breaks the law that his conscience tells him is unjust and willingly accepts the penalty to arouse the conscience of a community as to how unjust that is, in that very moment, he or she is showing the highest respect for the law." So I could get into all kinds of things. There's violent, non-violent civil protest. Some people believe that it has to be civil. I don't know. The Stonewall riots were pretty violent. The Tea Party was pretty violent. I love it when people say, "Oh my God, all these BLM, like they're looting stores." Well, do a little history on the Boston Tea Party. People lost a lot of merchandise on that day as well. There's collective versus solitary civil disobedience. There's all kinds of that. I'll just close with a quote, and I'm happy to answer any questions that I can. Justice Louis Brandeis, my favorite justice, had a saying, and his saying is, if we desire respect for the law, we must first make the law respectable. So we as social workers, everybody has that duty. And in closing, I want everyone to admire my RBG cufflinks. I don't know if you can see them. They're my RBG dissent cufflinks. So there, I feel like I'm, there we go. So that's it. I'm done, and I'll answer any questions that anyone may have. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think important points to note that you have to be ready to accept the consequences of the disobedience and be in it for that as well, and know that you're engaging in something, but there's a purpose beyond just the disruption itself. Thank you so much, Terry. Now we're going to hand it over to Natalie Dr Bimbray. Welcome.
Good afternoon. So I see I have a number of students on who were talking in the chat here. So I am coming on not to talk or represent as a faculty member, but more so as Black Lives Matter. And so I say that statement and I say it again. And I noticed that Jennifer has her t-shirt on, but Black Lives Matter. And so what puzzles me is when in our profession, how are we disturbed when someone makes that statement? What is it that bothers a person? And if even it's you, I just ask you reflectively, what is it that bothers you when someone says Black Lives Matter? Why is that so? What people will say is reverse racism, or it's not inclusive of other groups. But why does it bother you? What is it that gives you the but when that statement is made? And so what I'm going to talk about a little bit about here is Black Lives Matter at school. But before I go into that, I want to just leave you or start with a quote. And I love quotes, I use them all the time. But James Baldwin, prolific writer and speaker, and the quote that he uses, not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it's faced. And so I say that because this is a time for us as social workers, is we need to recognize that our field has to change. Our field is dominated and rooted in white supremacy. And until we take a step to recognize that and start moving towards change in that, we won't change things. And we say we're doing all this for the clients or the population that we serve, but how can we effectively serve the population if we won't even recognize that their lives matter? And so it's time for us to think about a change. So Black Lives Matter at School is a movement, it's a grassroots movement that started in about 2016 out of Seattle, where a number of teachers and students wanted to wear Black Lives Matter t-shirts. And they did wear them actually to school as a campaign to raise awareness of what was happening to Black women who were being killed in our country by police officers. And so the message also said, say her name. The movement actually attracted national attention and it spread over to Phil. There was a lot of backlash actually first in Seattle for them starting the movement and just saying Black Lives Matter. It became a huge issue in the state and in the school districts. But the nation picked up on this information. And so what happened was it started to spread. So it reached over to Philadelphia, where they have a whole caucus that does Black Lives Matter in school. And then fast forward, I'm just gonna keep it moving, but fast forward up until I joined the steering committee in about 2019. And being on the steering committee, we have been doing a lot of work within the nation. And it's people just stepping to the plate. It's not where we have something like, we're not contacting people, say, hey, do you want to do this? Hey, can you do this? It's people are stepping up to the plate and say, this is what I want to do. It was mainly focused on K-12 education, but within the last year, it has expanded into higher ed. And so really, Kim made that statement, we have to disrupt systems and even our own system. And so when we get into higher ed, you can still see pushback in a lot of higher education institutions where they don't want to hear you state Black Lives Matter. Like we've done this even with medical medical professors and universities who they can specifically tell you in the textbooks, they will tell you not to give Black people a certain amount of medication because they're going to be addicted to it. You can't do this. They'll tell you the pain level is different, so you don't have to give them as much treatment. I mean, you can even look on any type of social media. You can see just a Black doctor who died of COVID after she continually told them over and over and over that her pain was there and they didn't believe her. And she was a medical professional. So again, it goes back to and I don't say just our profession, but our nation was built on racism. And so it's a time for us to really reckon with this and understand, like, what part do I play in this? What do I need to do to change me? And so what I would say is a question I always ask people, if not now, when? Because someone always says this isn't the right time. It's not the right way to do it. Well, when is the right time? What is the way? What's the best way to do it? People say, oh, wow, you shouldn't kneel during the national anthem. Okay, so if they stand up, then what? What's the difference? They say, oh, you shouldn't march in the streets. Okay, so if you stay home, what's the difference? Like, when is the right time? What's the appropriate way? And I've had arguments with people on social media as well. What is the appropriate way to protest? What should we say? What should we do? Where should we go with this protesting? But it's very real. It is very, I mean, I'm a strong advocate for civil disobedience. I actually took my daughters out to a protest last year, and it was very touching. They made their own signs and they carried them, but it was also a time to educate them so they can understand what is it that's happening. And when you see your own children's hearts breaking, when they're crying in front of you, asking why are Black people treated like this, or if they start having racial identity issues because of things they're being told in school, it's time out for us to say, it's not the right time to do this. And people say, don't start putting things in there for children. Don't tell them this stuff. Children aren't born racist. No, they're not born racist, but they're taught that. And so even for my own children to experience racism, to be under the age of 10, to me is ludicrous, but it happens. So what am I doing? I'm going to teach them. They walked with their signs proudly. My oldest, she's 10 now. She wanted to lead the chants. And so she stood right next to the person with the megaphone, and she wanted to be right there. She screamed George Floyd. She screamed Sandra. She screamed every name she could. She did it. And she marched right alongside them. So it is important that we take a step now and start to work with this and not just get comfortable in being who we are. Social work is about being uncomfortable. So it's time, get comfortable being uncomfortable, because it doesn't happen where it's just like, oh, it's just great. As Kim said, yes, we can do therapy, but you cannot have macro without micro, and you can't have micro without macro. If you don't understand the problem that your clients are going through, or the people, the population you're serving, then you can't go to a higher level and advocate for a policy because you don't even know what they're going through. And the same thing, you can't advocate for a policy or vice versa. So I do want to I'm in my time, because I know Jennifer said, if you see my face pop up, your time is up. But I am open for questions as well, and looking forward to the discussion with y'all.
Thank you so much. I think a little bit choked up because I too have a young son, and we too took him to march. And it is very different to see your children's experiences and to see them march and to have the conversation, and for them at even a young age of 7 and 8 to engage in what is racism. And even my son this last week at school experienced a microaggression, and he's one of the only Black children in his class. And we live in a very white community, and his mother is white, and they probably don't think about that. And like, how do we start to educate our children at a young age about what do microaggressions look like? And then how do we help the educators in these communities understand what do microaggressions look like? And how does that filter up to higher education? And so I'm really appreciative to the work that you're doing to challenge. And I think one of the things that keeps emerging is like this theme is like, what is the right way to do it? And there isn't any right way to be an advocate or to use your voice or to dismantle it, except for see it, address it in that moment, and, you know, give each other a little grace in doing so, hopefully, because there isn't one size fits all way of advocacy. It's not write a letter, do a thing. Like it has to be all of us on the same page, using all of the tools that we have available, social media, protesting, civil disobedience, talking with our kids, all of that to really affect change. I'm really excited we could talk about this forever. But I do have to welcome, last but certainly not least, Mora. Welcome to the conversation. Thank you for joining us.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. I have no idea how to follow any of my 3 previous co-panelists, but I really appreciate you all being here and being able to listen to your stories and experiences. I would also like to start off with a quote. I was, in these pandemic days, we're all kind of hooked into our own media in a different way than we might have been before. So I was watching the royal interview with Meghan Markle on Oprah. That's where this is going. And I'm actually going to open with a quote that really struck me by Meghan Markle, who is a beautiful person, inside and out. She says, life is about storytelling, right? Stories we tell ourselves, what we buy into. And for us to be able to have storytelling through a truthful lens, that hopefully is uplifting. It's going to be great knowing how many people can be that can land with and be able to give a voice to a lot of people that are underrepresented and aren't really heard. And that really resonated with me in getting kind of my mind ready for this training and thinking about how to approach what I wanted to share. So if it's okay, what I'll do is a quick just summary of the work that I do. And then I'd like to share 3 quick stories, one micro, one meso, one macro. And I will wrap it up with a little Dr. Fauci plague, as well as an action item for those that are interested in doing something. So I'm going to speak quickly because I want to try and cram this into time. Jen, since your face is here, just wave at me when it's time and I'll land the plane. So happy to answer questions later as well. So I'm an LCSW in the state of Delaware. I went to the University of Southern California for my grad school, went to Mills College, which is in Oakland. That's where I'm from originally, California, the Bay Area. Such a good question. I have specialized largely in LGBTQ folks and especially LGBTQ youth, domestic violence, in children and families, as well as HIV. So right now I'm currently serving in a couple of really awesome roles. I'm the board president for the Delaware NASW, clinical director at AIDS Delaware, so I oversee a mental health program there, and I'm the founder of The Village, which is something I'll talk about a little bit more in a second. I also this will be relevant to one of my stories, I'm queer, I am non-binary, and I use they, them pronouns. So we'll come up. All right, so thinking about, social work, that obviously part of our purpose in this field is to advocate against oppression and injustice. A lot of the times, another saying is that none of us are in this field for a reason. We are all in this field for a reason, and it's not the money, right? Wrong, just ignore the brain weasels. But I think that there's always some truth to that. And also, we don't have to settle for less money, right? We deserve to get paid for our work, right? It's really hard, good work that we do, but we are generally all in this field for a reason. And so one of the stories I'm going to tell at first is actually my own of being a human, and how that kind of led me to do the work that I'm doing. So this is micro. And I was 17 at Thanksgiving dinner. My uncle is a political consultant of sorts. And while over Thanksgiving dinner with my partner, who is transgender, again, I'm queer, non-binary, we're just a big rainbow in our whole house. We leave a trail of glitter everywhere we go. I get a text and from someone else in the family, and they ask if I know what my uncle Frank is doing these days. Come to find out, he is one of the masterminds behind Prop 8. Which, for those who don't know, I don't expect you to if you're not from this area, but in California, it was a huge deal, and it made national news too, but it was a ban on same-sex marriage. And it was devastating to hear that. I just immediately was sick to my stomach. I don't think I ate anything. I think we just grabbed our stuff and left, but it's honestly quite a blur. It was traumatizing. And I went home and really had waves of suicidality and just rage, and was hard to figure out where to put those feelings. Remember, I was 17. So one of the social workers at my school actually, she wasn't even assigned to me. She just kind of connected with me somehow. She probably just knew I needed a lifeline. She literally saved my life. And she connected me eventually with some other queer youth that were doing political activism. And that became just one of the most empowering experiences that I've ever had, save for what happens in my next story. So meso level, I want to talk a little bit about some of the work that I'm doing a little bit more recently related to that. I was, after being in Delaware for about a couple of years, 2 or 3 years, I had tried to find connections to LGBTQ community, but I was really struggling. I wanted to offer whatever I could to kind of give back. I wasn't sure what organizations were here and active and might need volunteers. And I found that there were a lot of really good organizations, but they were kind of in silos, and it was hard to find a common thread and how to connect with these groups in a way that I could actually make myself useful. So I ended up hosting a town hall with any stakeholder that I could identify in this area, invited all of them to invite the people that they knew. And at the Route 9 Library in Newcastle, we had a huge, awesome town hall. Almost 100 people showed up. It was astounding. People from all over, mostly Newcastle County, but a few folks from elsewhere in the state of Delaware, and some youth. And that was really, really cool. So we made a decision to prioritize youth voices, and we were talking about what kind of services are out for LGBTQ youth. Long story short, not enough. One of the things that the queer youth wanted was, I say queer, by the way, that includes trans youth. A lot of the youth we work with are non-binary or trans. They wanted some sort of way to get involved in the same way that I did. So we created a leadership program, and this will be the 3rd year now that we're doing it. It starts in April. If y'all know us, a shameless plug, if you know any LGBTQ youth that want to participate in a program, it's really cool. We pay them. I believe that's really important, by the way, if you are in speaking of advocacy, but if you're in a position of financial privilege, you should absolutely always, pay people, compensate them for their emotional labor. So we do that in this program, and we got them connected with lots of political figures and also just other leaders in the community to get some representation, because it really does matter to be able to see and connect with others. So I'll wrap this one up real quick. So those youth just were awesome. Last year, they really wanted, we do a community service project every year. They really wanted to do a big give back. They wanted to go out and march with Black Lives Matter in Wilmington. However, a lot of them under 18 would not get parent permit, were not given parent permission, and COVID was already present. So there was a lot of concerns about what they could do, and they really wanted to do something. So we did a big brainstorm, and our 15 LGBTQ youth we did a fundraiser, we raised $700, and we put together over 200 street safety kits for people protesting police violence that we were able to give out in Wilmington. And it was really an awesome experience. The kits had things from masks to hand sanitizer to some sort of like liquid that helps if you get pepper sprayed, to a little zine that has information on the ACLU and where you can call if you get in trouble with the police, things to do or not do, legal things to say or not say. So it was a really cool experience, and being able to see that ripple impact was just really amazing. It all came from learning my uncle was a bigot. Isn't that so great? Thank you, Uncle Frank, for Thanksgiving. That was lovely. All right, so I'm gonna wrap up real quick with macro, and I will plug a film called How to Survive a Plague. So if you're curious and want to know more about this history, I would strongly recommend that. And this is where the Dr. Fauci kind of blurb comes in. So one of the things thank you. One of the things that I'm doing right now is I'm working with the Department of Public Health in Delaware to offer for free a motivational interviewing training on all of the case managers that work with people living with HIV throughout the entire state. Why am I doing that? Well, because there is a lot of concern, valid concern within the community of people living with HIV about getting vaccinated, for valid reasons. Unfortunately, the African-American community is way overrepresented in Delaware in terms of HIV rates because of a lot of systemic injustice issues that play a role. And if you look at historical context of vaccinations in our country and Black people, it's shameful. For those who aren't aware, you should look up the Tuskegee experiment. But valid concerns about why folks don't want to get vaccinated. At the same time, a lot of my clients have compromised immune systems, and for them, it could be literally life or death. So it was really important. I was also seeing the rates in the state of Delaware are disproportionate, extremely disproportionate for who's getting vaccinated. It's almost all white people, which is not representative of our state as a whole. So I really wanted to offer something tangible to the case managers to be able to help them guide their clients to making their own decisions about their health, but that lead them to kind of living within their own value set, their own goals. And, you know, motivational interviewing is kind of one of the best evidence-based ways of doing this. So, all right, I think that is, that's all I'm going to say about those stories. I was thinking also about another saying from AA, and I'll wrap it up with this, that hurt people, right? We probably all heard that or something like that. And it's true, but I also want to just revisit the opposite, which is that empowered people empower people. And it was a social worker who saved my life, empowered me. I think now it makes me feel super old, but I think I'm like the queer elder to some of these other queer and trans youth that are out there doing some really good work. And I just think about, you know, the ripple and, you know, being part of my family, redefining what that has meant. And for sure, social workers are my people. So I'm really honored to be part of the Cool Kids Club. Thanks for having me here today. And I will also be happy to answer any questions folks might have.
Thank you so much, Elle, for sharing your personal stories. I think a lot of us face super similar challenges within our own families. I assure you, I am from Kansas. I understand some of those challenging relatives and how they have shaped our lives.
Jennifer, can I talk very briefly on social media? I think it's important because that was one of the things we were supposed to address. There's just a couple things so quick. Number one, we as humans are currently experiencing the greatest evolution in humanity since Gutenberg invented the printing press. And a lot of the same questions, you know, the printing press was only supposed to print Bibles, and then it started printing other things that it wasn't supposed to. Jump in this revolution, right? We are social workers. We're supposed to be on the front line. Use it as a tool. The average waking human spends 29% of his or her waking life on their cell phones and in social media. So any social agency that is not devoting 29% of its resources in that sphere is at a disconnect with the clientele it's trying to reach. That's number one. Number two, I cannot stand when I see people on Facebook or Insta or anyone else say, I believe in this, and if you believe otherwise, unfriend me right now. Well, that is just stupid, people, because if all you want to do is get your message to people who think like you, great, keep doing that. But if you really want to change hearts and minds, you have to be friends with people that you might not otherwise be friends with and make them hear what you have to say. Because if they're your friend and you show up on their news feed, every once in a while, they're going to see something that's making them pause. But if they unfriend you, they're never going to see it. So be engaged, get in there, spend, as an agency or a clinician, spend 29% of your waking life using social media as a tool for social action, number one. And number two, make sure you're talking to people other than your friends. That's it.
Thank you so much. I think that's actually an interesting transition back to Kim, perhaps, for a second, because I think what we saw over the summer was us as an association saying, you're not a member, we're not going to listen to your voice, we're not going to hear what you have to say. And I think, you know, we sort of unfriended you in a professional space.
Girl, y'all blocked us. You blocked me. Ain't no unfriend, you blocked me.
Just to be clear, it was in New Jersey, but yes, that is exactly what happened.
Kim, I will never unblock you, okay? Kim, you are welcome. I want to see it. I want to see it, you know, right in my face, because if I can't see it, I can't understand it.
Right, and I think that's such an important thing. Like, we cannot silence the voices that are different or that aren't part of the Cool Kids Club, right? So everybody's cool. We want to invite everybody to the club because there's lots of room at this table for all of our voices. The question came in for you, Kim. So I'm going to start asking some questions. For those of you who have them, please raise your little virtual yellow hand. I think that's what it is, or just put them in the chat box so we can ask them. But Kim, how did you get over the fear, if there was any, there may not have been, of backlash, negative career consequences to your using your platform and your voice? Or did you experience that, and how did you navigate through that, or how do you?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily label it as fear. I've been someone, especially just from the way I've been conditioned to do the work of having boundaries. So I think it's important to understand social media is a great tool for connection, but it's also a method that can cause exhaustion, like mental exhaustion, emotional exhaustion. So I think it's very important that even however you're engaging on social media, you're doing so authentically and with boundaries in place. So in terms of like negative kind of pushback or how it might impact my career, I only know how to be myself. Like even on the internet, I only know how to be myself. And so the same way I show up on social media, I show up in meetings and when it's time to make decisions, when it's time to advocate or whatever it is, like I'm showing up the same space, the same person in every space. So there really isn't a fear of consequence because I'm not going to say things I wouldn't say to somebody. Right. So I think it's important to understand that you got to live authentically in all ways in every place and that you can't allow social media. I think we see people who are influencers become characters on social media, but then when you kind of interact with them in life, you'd be like, like that don't match up. And so I think that could be where the fear or apprehension comes from is people are not them whole selves everywhere and they show up fragmented and they use social media to live a life that's not even theirs authentically. So for me, I didn't have any fear because I'm just me.
Thank you. It's such an important piece to like show up authentically and not being sort of the bully behind social media as we see some people doing, but if you show up authentically in all of your spaces, hopefully there's a little less fear. Another question that came in for perhaps the panel, and I'd love to hear all of your thoughts on it. How can we prepare professionally for an arrest while practicing civil disobedience? Is this a dialogue we should be having with our educators, our schools, our practices, our employers, and even thoughts on what that means for our license?
So I have as the resident lawyer, I feel compelled to speak on that. Number one, you may or may not be aware, but I believe your AAA card is a $500 bail bond. That's number one. Number two, I think you need to be prepared if you're going somewhere and you believe you're going to be arrested. I think pre-planning for that. I think it's important to let people know where you're going, let people know who you're with. It may or may not be a bad idea besides having a, your cell phone on, even having a GoPro on your person or having a buddy with you who plans to not be arrested, but who will be, documenting that anyway. I think you need to be prepared. I know this sounds silly, but you need to be prepared like on issues of childcare and how long you're going to stay there. Like, and I see Kim like nodding her head. Typically it's not fun and sexy to get arrested. Okay. It's not for the faint of heart. And so, I think you need to do that. I think you probably need to have an attorney in advance. And I think, if you're really going to make the most effective, arrests are those in which the overwhelming power comes from the aggressor of law enforcement. And the victim or the person being arrested, because if while you're getting arrested, you're fighting back, there's going to be a segment of society that's like, oh, see that I hate to use the word, they're uppity. I know that's a racially charged word, right? So I think preparing to get arrested, you need to prepare way in advance. And then I think you need to have conversations with the people around you and candidly conversations within the depth of your soul space. Let's say you get arrested. All you have to do is plead guilty to get out. Okay, maybe I'll plead guilty. Maybe I ain't going to do that. I'm going to be sitting there a while. So if you're going to do it right, plan ahead.
Thank you. Kim, I wonder, I know, and I'm going to butcher it. I'm just absolutely sure of it. So I don't remember her name, but there is the story of a social worker over the summer who I think you know of as well.
Yeah, Michaela Hatton.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, so I mean, even to Terry's points that she made around, you got to prepare to be arrested. If you think back or do your research in terms of like the civil rights movement, the months of training and education and preparation that they went through to prepare for the struggles. And so, you know, I'm a young OG, I'm a millennial. I have so much respect for Generation Z and my current generation, but this instant need to like get out there, be loud and wrong and not be prepared has like cost us some like small wins in these fights for liberation and the fights in the struggle. And so I think it's important to know there's a lot of training, you know, there's a lot of teaching that goes into being part of acts of civil disobedience. It is not just showing up and being loud.
And Jennifer, if I could just add to that, because that was the first thing I thought of too, was the civil rights movement. The preparation that was done. I mean, if you go to any civil rights museum, anything like that, you can see like they were in a room, they were taught like someone would stand over them and call them racially charged words. If they couldn't control that, then they would say, you're not ready to go out. So there was a lot of preparation needs to take place. But like Terry said, you know, thinking about it in advance, making sure you know who can they call, who can you call, make sure people know where you're at, so that you're not just out there. And then there's a couple of questions that came up in the chat for Terry too, in terms of if I'm there's a couple of questions over there in the chat that I think that Terry could answer, but I still think it's important that you should prepare. And like Kim said, don't just jump and just run out there. I think that's going to be the bigger issue. It's because if you don't really know the landscape, you don't really know how the situation forms in those areas, then you don't want to just throw yourself to the wolves and then say, well, I'm out here because I'm a social worker and I'm using civil disobedience. So you get in good trouble, but you need to be wise in terms of your good trouble.
I think that's important to prepare. I mean, we can learn so much from the lessons of the past, and the training and preparation and education about what we need to be doing and how we encounter, and just even how we process it as humans, right? I mean, it is not a little thing to engage in civil disobedience and be arrested. And another question that came in sort of speaks to that. So how does civil disobedience impact professional opportunities in your workplace, if at all? And I wonder if all of you might have a little experience with that in some level, and even just your affiliation and your work in advocacy, how has that impacted your professional space?
So there's one specific question somebody asked: if they were arrested and it was expunged, can they still get an internship? Probably yes, but you know, here's where I'm going to say something, and I'm very politically incorrect, not because just because I'm too stupid to be politically correct. And so not all arrests are as sexy as others, for lack of a better word, right? Like, Rosa Parks' arrest was sexier than, there was actually a prior teenager who refused to give up her seat on the bus, but she was seen as being a little bit too violent and too fighting back. And so, look, if you're arrested for like assaulting a police officer, that's not as sexy. It's not going to help you get a job as much as if you're arrested for like, sitting and protecting an immigrant, or you're just sitting at a BLM rally and you refuse to move off the Capitol steps, right? So not all arrests are equal. Not all victims are equal. That's the other thing about planning for civil disobedience. Many of the social rights activism that happen is by finding the perfect victim, right? You need a victim who looks smart. You need a victim who doesn't look too threatening. You need a victim who's clean cut, who can talk the way they're supposed to talk, who can take the beatings the way they're supposed to beat it. It ain't easy taking one for the team, and not everyone has that power or ability. So not all arrests are the same when it comes to how that will impact you professionally down the line.
I thought I had somebody else jumping in. I'm going to bring on Sarah. Sarah Kim, I believe. You've had your hand raised. I'm going to unmute you.
Oh, sorry. I actually just unmuted myself, but that's okay. So yes, question for the panelists. Well, I might have like a two-parter, I guess. Yeah. Well, first, thank you all. It was great listening to you. So I had made a comment earlier, and this question kind of refers to that comment about, how do we address our peers, or sometimes even our professors, who don't seem to care about the social activism, social justice piece of social work. It can get really frustrating. And the, I guess, next part of that is, how can we engage in open conversation with people who might just completely outright refuse to even listen or try to understand someone else's point of view? How can we walk that line between trying to educate people, but also protecting our own energy?
I have a little bit of an answer, which is that is fresh in my mind talking about motivational interviewing, but there are some really good approaches in that intervention for just how to have those kinds of conversations with folks that, you see a discrepancy between your goal and that person's goals, and maybe especially when you can see that they're probably not living within their values. Certainly if this is somebody in the field of social work, we have an ethical requirement to get involved. Right? Those of us, especially the more privileged we have an ethical requirement to be willing to sit down in front of some other people and be on the front lines of getting arrested and facing some of this stuff. So, I would think, the connection really is kind of the most important thing. And also choosing your battles in the sense that I don't know how to say this with much diplomacy, but not everybody's worth the time and energy it takes to have these conversations. And if they can't have, a little bit of basic dignity and respect for what you're talking about, it might be more important to kind of start there. But if you can see that their values don't align with their ethics, yes, emotional labor, thank you, then you can use some motivational interviewing tactics, such as like open-ended questions. They're pretty simple in practice, to get them to align their behavior more with who they claim to be or purport to exist as.
One of the things that I try to do is, look, here's the reality. There's 2% of this world on either side that you're never, ever going to change their opinion. And really, okay, but the rest of the 95% of the world is somewhere in between. So whenever I encounter someone who's completely diametrically opposed, I clerked for the Republican Attorney General who writes the rules of court and was accused of racial profiling. Like, I've had these, and so what I do when I sit down with those people, generally it helps if you have a cup of tea or even a glass of wine, and I'll ask a question like, I understand you're not a fan of Black Lives Matter, and I say something like, is there any part of that movement that you could identify with or that you respect? And you'd be surprised, right? And sometimes, sometimes it's getting those little things of common ground, or, or what is the biggest thing that bothers you about that movement? And then, so, not everyone is pure evil, not everyone is pure wonderful. But what I usually like to do is start the conversation where I can find common ground, even if it's the tiniest piece of common ground. Try to find that small piece of common ground, and then from there, do the harder work, go out in like a concentrical circles.
Oh, you're going to say
right
something? Okay.
No.
This is it's an interesting question because one of the things you mentioned too, Sarah, was not only just speaking with someone else, but also in a class, if your instructor also does not agree with some of your views. So on the one side, I'm going to say, you don't push the issue, right? Because you want to get out of school, right? So don't make it where you're going to throw yourself, like we say, good trouble, we mean wise trouble still, right? But on the other hand, one of the things I always talk about, anytime I do any work in terms of racism or bias work, if it's somebody that I don't really know that well, and I don't really have a strong relationship with them, that's not my goal, is to force them to believe what I'm telling them. Right. So I'm going to have a discussion, but I'm not going to just go crazy and be like, you got to hear this. Like, if you see somebody in the supermarket, I'm not going to go crazy and be like, no, you need to take that hat off. Like, why? Like, what is that? What benefit is that for me? Am I going to see this person again? So really what I would say, and kind of what Terry is saying here too, is you find a common ground with somebody. You're not going to agree with everybody. You won't. It doesn't matter who it is. You don't agree with your family members, any person. You're not going to have total agreement with them, but you can find some common ground. But then also too this isn't, when you talk about justice in terms of equity, racial justice, anything like that, when we say the fight is where we need to change things on different levels. I'm not going to sit and fight with my next door neighbor because they have this sign out in front of their house. You know, like, I'm not going to do that. Like, I have a neighbor who had this big Trump sign out, and every time he drive past me, he's like, hey, and I'm looking at him like, are you kidding me? Like, are you really talking to me? Like, because I'm confused, right? Because I'm like, how do your values line up like that? But then I'm not going to shade them and just be like, I'm not going to talk to you. So I say hi, how you doing, whatever, but I don't want to keep that whole conversation going because of my own feelings I need to deal with. So one of the things is I think we have to deal with ourselves in terms of, what am I bringing to the table? Am I coming to someone and being argumentative? Am I coming to somebody to force my points on them? If you're not, if that's the case, then maybe just kind of like, all right, let me step back. But if my point is, I want to find a common ground so that people can see me for who I am and I can be humble in who I am and learning about them, that's when you might effect change. So instead of just throwing it at somebody and just screaming at them like, you better do it. No, let me learn something about you and then let's talk. And then people start to see you. They'll see you better. And I always say to people, you win more bees with honey. Right. And sometimes you do have to come and just drop something and be like, listen, it's this, and this. I mean, but I'm only going to do that when I have fact. If it's something that you're saying that's just not a fact, then I can do that. But if it's my opinion, it's hard to prove your opinion as being a fact. So you really have to really gauge it and really take the road and I guess I will use Michelle Obama when she says, when they go low, we go high. So I'm not going to go and go crazy and do all these different things. It's just, let me just start where you're at. And then I can work with you because I know I see you. I know where you're at.
That's such a good social work perspective, right? Meeting people where they're at and trying to build those relationships from there. You're right. We cannot fight all the people at the grocery store down the street or the guy down the road from us who has 52 bumper stickers. I'm not sure who needs to tell him, but 2020's over, you lost. And it's probably take some of those down.
Oh, that election was stolen, Ms. Thompson.
I stand corrected. I'd still like us all to remove all the stuff from 2020. Let's just forget. We could certainly continue this conversation forever. We had a lot of conversation in chat still in the message box. I'm sorry we're not going to be able to get to them. I know though our panelists are all incredibly busy individuals and we are sticklers for time here. I hope that all of you will come back and join us in this space again for some conversation. I think your experience and your wisdom and your knowledge is something that our students particularly benefit from, learning from leaders who have gone before them and just understanding how to get into the good trouble and how to use their voices and their social media platforms and their own personal lived experiences to be agents of change. So thank you so much for all of your time. Jeff, I believe we are headed to a break now. He is the keeper of our schedule.